Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Health authorities estimate that the city is seeing 10,000 new COVID infections each day. According to the hospital authority, most COVID patients who were admitted to public hospitals only had mild symptoms. Experts think there is no need yet to step up COVID control measures. Earlier, Secretary for Health Lo Chong-mao estimated some 10,000 people were coming down with COVID each day. A family doctor said almost 80 people sought medical help at his clinic daily, and half of them were COVID patients. While most of them are elderly patients, there are simply not enough COVID oral pills. Dr. Lam Wing-wo said his clinic used to order only 6 doses of the 2 types of antiviral drugs each time. But in the past 2 weeks, he had to order 20 doses. As of Friday, a total of 2,700 coronavirus patients were receiving treatment in public hospitals, with each of them staying for no more than 5 days. Hospital Authority Chairman Imran Khans expects the number of infected people to go up. The Emergency Operation Command, set up in June last year to cope with urgent service demands, has resumed full-day operations. Khans said, "We will monitor the situation closely, including the number of people being admitted or discharged." He said if needed, extra beds and resources will be provided to help hospital staff. But an infectious disease expert thinks Hong Kong has technically entered the 6th wave of COVID infections, which will persist until the summer holiday. Joseph Zhang thinks there is no need to reintroduce the mask mandate or resume social distancing measures for now. That's because severe cases only make up a small proportion of the total. Still, he thinks if the situation gets worse, then certain measures that were used in the past may have to be re-adopted. Meanwhile, the hospital authority will roll out a global talent scheme next month to attract talent from abroad. The medical professionals being targeted include specialists from the Chinese mainland and abroad.
We are adopting a multi-pronged approach, you see. This global talent scheme, the main purpose is to attract talents who need or who believe they can gain from receiving some training at HA to come and work for us for a year or 2, thereby creating a win-win situation for both sides.
Imran Khans said it has recruited 500 doctors last year, but admits that experience might not match up to the talent the HA has lost. He added following the authorities' recruitment drive in the UK last year, nearly 140 employment agreements have been issued. More than 30 of the new recruits will arrive Hong Kong in a few months' time at the earliest. 8 people fell from a lifting platform in Kowloon City this afternoon. The equipment was being used by a film crew. A man with injuries to his legs was taken away on a stretcher. The crane in question flipped backwards. Police say a crew was filming for a movie just outside the Regal Oriental Hotel on Sampo Road at around 4 p.m. today. The crew used a crane to lift up a steel frame, but the crane lost balance and tipped over. 8 workers were injured. 1 of them is in a coma. They were admitted to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Residents say the crew has been filming in the area recently. Overseas, U.S. President Joe Biden said today he still believes the United States will be able to avoid a debt default despite talks between the White House and House Republicans stopping and starting. On Friday, negotiations came to a halt as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy called for a pause. They restarted later in the evening. Matthew Ray reports.
At the G7 summit in Japan, Joe Biden began his day with a briefing by staff on the latest shenanigans on how to raise the federal debt limit. He thinks a deal is likely, but Friday saw serious differences between the two sides. Talks in Washington came to a standstill when House Speaker Kevin McCarthy called for a pause. They convened again in the evening, only to call it quits for the night. Republicans do not want to see the borrowing limit raised. It currently stands at $31 trillion US.
This wasn't a negotiation today. This was a candid discussion about realistic numbers, a realistic path forward, and something that truly changes the trajectory of this country's spending and debt problems.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was left to put a brave face on it on how other nations were perceiving the impasse.
It is definitely a subject of interest here at the G7. countries want to have a sense of how these negotiations are going to play out, and the President has expressed confidence that he believes that we can drive to an outcome where we do avoid default.
McCarthy has said a resolution to the standoff is easy if only Biden's team would agree to some spending cuts. The biggest hurdle is the fiscal 2024 top-line budget amount. Democrats oppose these steep reductions Republicans have put on the table as potentially harmful to Americans. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said Treasury could run short of sufficient cash and borrowing resources to pay all of the U.S. government's bills as soon as June the 1st, without action by Congress to increase the debt ceiling. Talks are expected to resume through the weekend. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
The Group of Seven announced new sanctions against Russia on Friday on the first day of their three-day summit in Hiroshima, Japan. Today, G7 leaders united in urging China to pressure Russia to end the war in Ukraine while outlining their stance on Taiwan and economic competition with Beijing. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky touched down in Hiroshima to attend the gathering after giving a speech at an Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia. Daniel Rao tells us more.
The sanctions announced at the G7 summit in Hiroshima will see group members restrict the export of all important military materials to Russia across their jurisdictions. The group will expand the scope of sanctions to cover manufacturing, construction, transportation, commerce and other fields, and crack down on entities that help Russia deliver supplies to the front line in Ukraine. The G7 will further restrict Russia in terms of the international financial system and will use measures including export bans and oil price ceilings to limit Russia's energy revenue. Restrictions on Russian diamond exports will also be imposed.
The most important thing we can do right now for global peace and security is to support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia, but also to ensure that Russia pays a price for its illegal and unprovoked act of aggression. That's why we've announced new sanctions.
Also on Friday, US President Joe Biden told G7 leaders that Washington supports joint allied training programs for Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighters, a significant endorsement as Kyiv seeks to boost its air power against Russia. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan did not say which countries would participate. However, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the UK would work with the Netherlands, Belgium and Denmark to get Ukraine the combat air capability it needs. Denmark's defense ministry said it was ready to support the training. Sullivan added the US hopes to begin the training in the coming weeks. Russia's deputy foreign minister responded by saying Western countries would be running colossal risks if they supplied Ukraine with F-16s. In a joint statement issued today, the G7 leaders called on China to press Russia to stop its military aggression and immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw its troops from Ukraine. The statement also sought to counter accusations that the G7 is seeking to prevent China's rise as a global power. It said the G7 did not want to harm China and was seeking constructive and stable relations with Beijing and a peaceful resolution to the Taiwan situation. The statement warned China and North Korea against building up their nuclear arsenals. On Friday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry commented on the G7 summit as it got underway. Spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the world should get free from ideologization and small circles. He said China adheres to the path of peaceful development and firmly upholds the open strategy of mutual benefit and cooperation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Hiroshima today to attend the summit. He met with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni on the sidelines of the gathering. A European Union official told reporters that Zelensky will take part in two separate sessions on Sunday. The first session will be with G7 members only and will focus on the war in Ukraine. The second session will include the G7 as well as the other invited nations and will focus on peace and stability. Zelensky's visit to Hiroshima comes after he attended an Arab League summit in the Saudi Red Sea city of Jeddah on Friday. Addressing the summit in English, Zelensky said Ukraine will never submit to any foreigners or colonizers and criticized Iran for supplying attack drones to Russia. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman expressed support for whatever help in reducing the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Daniel, TVB News.
China's special envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, is continuing his diplomatic tour of Europe. He held talks with Poland's deputy foreign minister in Warsaw on Friday. Li had visited Kiev earlier this week and discussed ways to end the war in Ukraine through a political settlement. The Polish Foreign Ministry said Deputy Foreign Minister Wojciech Gerwel had called on Beijing to use its influence on Russia. Lee said China attached importance to Poland's role in regional affairs and was willing to continue to communicate with the country regarding a political settlement of the Ukraine conflict. According to the Polish Foreign Ministry, Lee said during the talks that the situation in Ukraine was not in anyone's interest, but that there was no easy solution. China put forward a 12-point peace proposal for the war in February. The plan urged both sides to agree to a gradual de-escalation and warned against the use of nuclear weapons. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on the sidelines of the Arab League summit in Jeddah on Friday. It was the leader's first visit to the oil-rich kingdom since Syria's conflict began in 2011. The Jeddah Declaration was adopted at the summit, which calls for Arab unity to solve regional issues. The declaration welcomed Syria's readmission to the Arab League and vowed to intensify pan-Arab efforts to help Syria tackle its crisis. Syria was expelled 12 years ago, which saw Assad turn towards non-Arab allies, Iran and Russia. Years of fighting in Syria involving Assad's forces, the opposition and jihadi groups like the Islamic State left entire villages and neighborhoods in ruins. Assad remains a pariah in the West over his forces' aerial bombardment and gas attacks, which hit civilians during the conflict. Welcome back to TVB News. There are conflicting reports as to whether the home of former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has been searched by police looking for suspects wanted in relation to recent violence during anti-government protests. After Khan's release from arrest last week, police alleged that he is sheltering 30 to 40 people in his upscale Zaman Park residence. These people apparently took part in attacks on state and army buildings. But Khan has said a search could only be carried out if it was conducted by a panel set up by the High Court with members of the government, his own party, and a female officer included. He fears police would plant weapons in his home if they entered unsupervised. It is the latest standoff between the ex-cricketing legend and the military that has inflamed instability in the country. The head of Pakistan's Islamist Jamaat-e-Islami party has narrowly escaped being killed in a suicide attack in Restif, Balochistan province. Sirahul Haq was entering the district of Job in the southwestern province when a bomber detonated explosives strapped to his waist. His car convoy was front and center of the attack, but he managed to emerge unscathed. 5 people were wounded and the attacker died. There was no claim of responsibility, but militants and armed groups have staged attacks in Balochistan for years. In Serbia, Friday, tens of thousands of protesters marched through the capital Belgrade in response to 2 recent mass shootings that killed 18 people. The demonstrators blamed the deaths on a culture of violence which they say the government has allowed to fester unchecked. On May the 3rd, a teenage boy killed 9 pupils and a security guard in a school mass shooting in Belgrade. A day later, a 21-year-old man in a car opened fire and killed 8 passers-by in a town south of the capital city. Opposition parties who organized the protest say the government has failed to rein in media that promote violence. Today was the annual Senior Council appointment ceremony in Hong Kong. 4 senior councils were appointed this year. Chief Justice of the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, Andrew Cheung, reminded them of their shared responsibility to defend the rule of law and protect the city's legal system. Memo Singai reports.
This morning, the atmosphere at the Court of Final Appeal was buzzing, as this was where the annual Senior Council appointment ceremony was held. They are the 4 new senior counsels this year: Bruce Tse, Anthony Chan, Mike Loy and Christopher Chang. The 4 barristers have different backgrounds. For instance, Tse is married to District Judge Adriana Noella Tse Ching, and Chan is the son of the former WHO Director General Margaret Chan. Chief Justice Andrew Jern, who addressed the ceremony, mentioned the various responsibilities that a senior counsel needs to carry, such as upholding the rule of law and the proper administration of justice. While Jern reminded the senior counsels of their duties, he also addressed all lawyers in Hong Kong, saying everyone should protect the rule of law against those seeking to undermine it. Meanwhile, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam said some people wish to see the city's legal system fail, urging the legal sector to work together and speak up against false accusations against the system to ensure the public are not misled. Mimosa, TVB News.
Starting at 5 a.m. tomorrow, the Shing Mun tunnels will implement the e-toll system. This means drivers will no longer need to wait at toll booths to pay fees. Following the Changsha Control Area, the free-flow tolling service HKE Toll will start at Shing Mun tunnels tomorrow. The Transport Department said while there were about 50 complaints about the e-toll system during the initial stage at the Changsha Control Point, it stressed the system is accurate. Today is May the 20th, with the number 520 sounding like I love you in Putonghua. Many lovebirds have decided to tie the knot on this very day. The Immigration Department noted some 232 couples got married today. That's close to 248, the number of couples who got married in the city on Valentine's Day this year. Some told us they had to reserve this day 3 months in advance for the wedding registration. Meanwhile, 52 couples aged over 65 who have been married for over 3 decades renewed their vows today. Many of them were not able to wear a wedding gown during their previous ceremony. And in Beijing, 5,100 couples tied the knot on this special day as well. And that's the news for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night.